Hello, greetings everyone. I am Danilo Lopes Porto Jr. I represent the institution Unis Educational. I've got professional experience as executive superintendent of a federal public bank, and I'm gonna give you a quick lecture on the operation of the Brazilian banks and their relevance on the governmental measures to mitigate the impact of the pandemic through a market research with the perception of medium and large companies in the Vale do Paraíba metropolitan region, São Paulo, Brazil. During this lecture, we'll talk about the topics: a disruptive movement of the economy at the emergence of the pandemic, a market research with the behavior of medium and large companies at the beginning of the pandemic, the rise of a giant in the West, a digital bank that embraced the Brazilian people, the highlights of the measures of the Ministry of Economy, like the PRONAMP and the PAC-FGI, and the restoration of the national economy. We'll analyze the performance of the public banks and get to an observation through that same field research of a disclosure. Bringing to you, were these measures really assertive? We'll see. The Brazilian banks have always proven themselves to be resilient to the adversities. In 2020, we started faced with a challenge, many challenges actually, such as the economy, with the historic reduction of the Brazilian economy's basic interest rate, which is the special liquidation and custody system, the Selic tax, with the competitivity with the birth of the fintechs and of the open bank through a general rehearsal that has been dated now, November 16, 2020, with the Brazilian Instant Payment 2, the PIX, making bank transfers available and interconnected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year round. We're in fact faced to an open bank in Brazil in 2021. But with the advent of the pandemic, new challenges came, not only for the banks, but for the whole economy. Here we'll discover the expectations and reactions of medium and large companies by means of a market research, where we put together the most important measures adopted in Brazil mainly, and what was the role of the banks, especially public banks. In our field research, we approach the medium and large companies' behavior. But what was our motivation? Well, because of the relevance of the medium and large companies on the Brazilian credit market, we decided to measure the expectations of the entrepreneurs. The medium and large companies today represent 85.5% of the total amount of credit granted in the last financial year, 2019, in Brazil. We'll go through 3 questions. First one, considering the company's indebtedness and the achievement of a credit contract already in progress, what was the impact of the pandemic on the decision-making over the business? And now, second one, regarding the need of credit to strengthen and protect the company's cash generation, what are the opportunities that come from its contracting? And third one, what are the threats reported by the surveyed that could be a signal for the adoption of measures to mitigate the economic effects of the financial and economic crisis in Brazil? Through research conducted between March 24th, 2020 and April 9th, we could measure what was the perception of the entrepreneurs on this case study. So, related to the first question, considering the company's indebtedness on the market from the perspective of the imminent or in-progress businesses on credit acquisition, what was the impact for the entrepreneur of the pandemic on the decision-making over the business? 26% of the businessmen showed expectation of use only in the future. 60% of the interviewed maintained their conservative positions or interrupted the use of resources coming from loans and financings. And only 14% have committed to expand their businesses through new credits. Observe that 86% of the companies in this consolidation interrupted or didn't have, at that time, conviction over the contracting or the importance of the credit for this market. In the second question of the field survey, from the point of view of new proposals about the need of new credit demands for the short term and new solutions, what were the opportunities that the Brazilian market, specifically the banks, could see from the perspective of the entrepreneurs? Then we have 7% that established for sure that they would demand credit in the short term with conviction. It's a level of certainty very low that points to a pandemic moment, to a crisis that's about to explode at that point. 14% didn't show any possibility of getting credit or any timely deals. In other words, they closed their doors on those new opportunities. 32% stated that they would keep in standby mode, with their activities paralyzed, waiting for an action, either from the government or the banks, or a market reaction in the short term to be able to take any position. They were inert before the crisis. 47% indicated extreme and imminent need for credit, and that they would do business with financial institutions. Our third question, pre-pandemic, approaches the threats reported by the surveyed. What are the inputs for the adoption of measures to mitigate the economic and financial crisis effects in Brazil? So let's take a look at the answers from the entrepreneur's perspective. 14% of the interviewed said that a reduction of costs and disinvestments were necessary, because they caused effect over the impact of the continuation of business, with job cuts and with reduction even on investments on their capacity of revenue generation. 17% pointed out the need for better conditions from the financial institutions, with reduction of the interest rate, longer payment terms, larger credit limits, and better banking services, making cost reduction and better efficiency possible for the companies. 24% were predicting big impact on their cash flow and on their results immediately. According to the entrepreneurs, measures of income stimulus that would keep the economy buoyant were necessary, mainly on the driving force economic sectors of the country. In other words, counter-cyclical economic measures were necessary from the perspective of the businessman, so that the Brazilian economy could resume. And 45% stated that they were waiting for economic policies, tax exemptions, adjustments on the exchange fee, on the basic interest rate, and flexibility on the social distancing. In the midst of a pandemic, before all the challenges 2020 brought to the banks, a giant rises in the West. Adopting, through a report as a source of research, published on November 10th in the Ministry of Economy Internet portal, adopting counter-cyclical measures, the Minister Paulo Guedes states that those counter-cyclical policies like the creation of the emergency aid and the job creation and emergency program, the BEM, were responsible for keeping the vital signs of the economy. And in the face of all these challenges for the banks, with the advance of the digital bank, a giant was born in the West. A federal public bank invested in total more than 258 billion reais in credit, heating the economy. Today, the digital bank has more than 100 million digital savings accounts. And in the face of all these challenges for the banks, leading this digital revolution in the country right in the middle of a pandemic. That is one of the important roles developed by the banks in Brazil in this year of 2020. The highlights of the measures of the Ministry of Economy for the credit heating and the economy encouragement through companies are the following: the PRONAMP, National Supporting Program to Micro Businesses and Small Companies, and also the PEAC, the Credit Access Emergency Program, FGI. Through those two programs that you can study about if you access the governmental websites of the Brazilian Civil House and Economy, we bring really interesting numbers. Brazil, from April 8th to November 23rd, have granted almost 130 billion in credit injected into the market by means of 5 lines. Among them are the two highlighted, which are programs launched for companies' access. Inside that portion of 129.65 billion until November 23rd, a federal public bank in Brazil had granted approximately 200,000 contracts in a value that surpasses 28.3 billion in credit. A highlight followed by the Banco do Brasil, also with state capital, with 129,000 contracts. That role, mainly of public banks, bringing capillarity and access to credit, allows us to end our research with the following information. Approaching those same entrepreneurs now in another period, at the end of November, we could measure that 7% of those entrepreneurs said that these measures nationally adopted in order to contain the impact of the pandemic at the end had a very small relevance on the impact their companies suffered. Only 7% also said that there was not any contribution, but the addition of 13% among the companies that said that the measures have contributed, even in a less relevant way, plus 40% that complemented, said that the measures have complemented the actions to resist the worst moment of the pandemic, also added to 33% of the companies that said those measures and actions were fundamental for the survival of the businesses in Brazil, get to an impressive 86% of the interviewed. That leads us to observe, to highlight, that the measures of credit access were fundamental to complement their actions to resist the worst moment, and even in smaller intensity, to contribute in a significant manner to the heating of the economy, for the subsistence of those businesses, and for the preservation of jobs and revenue. In total, the government has injected, through the measures and through the banks, almost 130 billion reais, consolidating 5 programs: the BNDES Giro, BNDES FGI, the FUP, the PEAC, Maquininhas, the PESE, and the PRONAMP FGO. The flagship of the credit access is the BNDES FGI, the PEAC FGI, with 83.23 billion reais injected. More than 120,000 companies were assisted by 46 different financial institutions. The 5 principal Brazilian banks, Caixa Econômica Federal, Itaú, Bradesco, Santander, and Banco do Brasil, represented 60.83% of the credit released to the market and 67.23% of the contracts established. We now get to the end of this lecture. We brought numbers, measures, the reality of the national scenario, and we'd like to thank the organizers of the International Symposium on Economic Thought, the ICET. Also thanking the UNIS group for making international experiences such as this possible to their people, aiming to prepare them for a new economy. And we also express our solidarity with the world because of the victims of this pandemic, and because of the social and economic impacts occasioned by this moment. Our desire is that we generate together a global vision turned to a new economy, able to give opportunities to all. Together, we can do more. Thank you.